Hi guys, Erin here. In this video, you'll learn about defining variables, or how you can take an abstract, fuzzy concept like mental health, creativity, intelligence, and turn it into something tangible and concrete that you can observe and measure. And we'll also be talking about some of the consequences of this. Here's where this video fits into the context of our course and in the quantitative research process. So let's start with this hypothesis. Doing Sudoku makes you smart. Whether you believe it or not, it's not a great hypothesis for the reasons we talked about in the last video. It's not really possible to test it. It's not really clear who you is and not really clear what we mean by smart. This is a theme of this video. There are many ways to define and measure variables. How you do so will impact the outcome of your study. So variables are the conditions or characteristics of people that we measure in a study. They're called variables because they can change over time or vary between people. Some variables can be measured directly, and everybody knows what you're talking about. For example, how tall you are, your height, or your weight, or your eye color. Others are more abstract, and so they're difficult to define and measure. We call these abstract. We call these constructs. They're arguably the more interesting aspect of the human experience, like intelligence, or creativity, or mental health. Because they have to be measured indirectly, it's up to the researcher to decide how they want to define them and measure them. We call these operational definitions. There's no right or wrong answer here, but the choices that you make as a researcher have to be justified. And when you're reading a study, you can ask yourself whether you agree with those choices. For example, let's take SMART. What's your operational definition of intelligence? What do you think of when I say intelligence? Well, maybe for you, intelligence is about your performance on a standardized IQ test, like the CHYS. This is the measure that's often used in research and in psychoeducational assessments. It tests really just two skills, people's visuospatial and their vocabulary ability. Maybe though, for you, this is a bit too narrow. Maybe when you think of intelligence, you think of how well people do on multiple different skills. Maybe you think of that show that used to be on TV, Canada's Smartest People. It was based on, or Canada's Smartest Person. It was based on Gardner's multiple intelligence scale, which measures intelligence in multiple different domains. The idea, though, is that how you operationalize a construct will determine how you measure it, what your results are, and what your conclusions are. Let me give you an example. This is a review of a study that says only stupid people have lots of friends. Do you believe it? Well, when I read that, I ask myself, how did they measure stupid? How did they measure intelligence? Because the way that they measured intelligence will totally influence the results that they find. I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to show you a bunch of scatter plots that show correlations between two variables. We'll be talking about correlations a lot in weeks to come. So here in a scatter plot, each dot represents a person, and where they fit on this graph tells us about their scores on each of those variables. So somebody up here would have high intelligence and low number of friends, versus somebody down here has low intelligence and high number of friends. This is the kind of results that they probably found in that study. And I would imagine they would find this if they defined intelligence using that more narrow, restricted definition of intelligence as found by IQ tests. However, if they had measured intelligence using the idea of emotional intelligence or how well you interact with other people, which is tested by Gardner's measure of interpersonal skills, they might have found a totally different pattern of results. They might have actually found a positive relationship between these two variables, that people who are smarter actually have more friends, and people who don't do as well on the intelligence test have fewer friends. Alternatively, if they had defined intelligence in a different way, I don't know, how well you can balance a ball on your nose, for example, they might have found a completely different pattern of results. They might have found no relationship between intelligence as measured by balancing skills and how many friends you have. As a side note, you'll probably agree with me that the ability to balance a ball on your nose is not a very great measure of intelligence. This gets into the idea of validity that we'll be talking about throughout the course. So operational definitions have their pros and cons. The downside is it might be hard to compare the results across different studies if they have different ways of defining and measuring a construct. This is often a problem when a different test is used to measure a skill in adults compared to kids. They might also leave out important aspects of a construct. For example, a criticism that's often been placed against traditional IQ tests is that they don't measure real-world practical skills, like how well you can handle money, for example. Finally, they might also measure extraneous factors that are not actually part of the construct being measured. For example, if English is not your first language, then your performance on an IQ test might actually reflect your English proficiency and not your actual intelligence. Similarly, if you have difficulty paying attention and staying focused for a long time, if you have ADHD, for example, you may get a low score on an IQ test that actually has nothing to do with your intelligence. Fortunately, there's a solution. There are ways that we can measure how good your measures are. Measurement validity and reliability. We'll be talking about that in the next video, so stay tuned.